Welcome. I'm David Graham, co-founder and CEO of VerifyU, and today we're sitting down with Wes Michael, who founded and sold Rare Patient Voice after nearly 15 years of heads down building one of the most trusted patient research panels in the world. So a little bit of background for all the listeners. This is the Human Hour, and the Human Hour is a conversation about what it takes to keep the internet human and the data businesses run on actually human as well. So welcome, Wes. Thanks for coming.
Hey, David, great to be here. Looking forward to it.
Awesome. Well, we can kick things off with kind of a little bit of a macro question about your career in market research. And really what I'm curious about is what originally pulled you in the first place, and then what kept you for such a long duration, and then ultimately gave you that motivation to find that exit eventually.
So yeah, I got into market research like most people that are in it accidentally. Nobody, when I grew up, I want to be in market research. Nobody. So I was working my first job out of college, a small computer consulting company, which I knew nothing about computers, but he would do surveys of the users of various things, and I would write it up, and I remember doing these all manual calculations, and it got me interested in research. Then I went back and got an MBA and really actually learned about statistics. But then I worked for some big companies in market research, General Mills. I was working Wheaties and Cheerios and such, and then McCormick, the spice company. So all sorts of things with consumers and why they do what they do, and I always found that interesting. And then I moved into the healthcare field, and that was a very exciting period of time where it shifted. You see all these ads in the US, certainly, ask your doctor about X or Y. That wasn't legal before the 90s. You could not advertise drugs by brand name on TV or anywhere. But became legal. And so all the companies, pharmaceutical, biotech companies, it was a whole new channel for them. They knew how to talk to doctors. They knew how to
Mm.
send a sales rep in one-on-one. They didn't know anything about TV. They didn't know about consumers. They didn't know how to do any of this stuff. And then the internet was coming into play where people were really using that for informational purposes. And so it was a very exciting time working with clients like that and educating them as to how they could apply those means. Well, what got me into all this thing specifically was a client came to us in the hemophilia space. Hemophilia is a very rare bleeding disorder. It was even rarer then because a whole generation had been wiped out because the treatment had been using a product made from human blood, and the HIV/AIDS epidemic was going on, and they didn't know enough to take that was in the blood supply, and they would give people this treatment, and it was just horrible, as you can imagine. But anyway, they came to us and said, can you build us what we call in research a panel, a group of people, patients and caregivers, because we want to know more about them, because we want to, the more we can get in their heads, the more we can provide products and services and make them come to us and be loyal to us and use our product. So like a lot of companies, we bid on it, we won it, and then we had to figure out how to do it, right? And we went to the National Hemophilia Foundation conference in person, set up our table, had giveaways, had our clipboards, and this was in 1998. So internet's around, but it's still pretty much paper and pencil. People would sign up, and it was very successful. We did a lot of surveys, we did a lot of interviews. The client was very happy, and every year we'd go back to that conference. So that could have been the end of the story, a nice, successful multi-year engagement. But a couple of years into that, a different client came up to me at one of those conferences and said, I hear you have this hemophilia patient panel. Can we access it? And the answer was simple. The answer is no. I mean, company A paid for it, so company B can't have access to it. But that gave me the idea. Why not set up a panel, a group of folks that are not beholden to any one company? They could answer hemophilia questions or whatever the disease for who knows who the client is.
Mm.
And especially with rare diseases, because you can find people with diabetes or such, but how do you find people with hemophilia? Well, I knew how to because I had done it, go to the hemophilia conferences. So that idea was in my head for many years, and I didn't do anything about it. But I kept thinking someday, and then it got to 2013. The company I was working for had some cash flow problems and asked if I could work a few months without being paid. And I thought, well, if I'm not being paid, maybe there's some, I've had this idea. And at the same time, my wife had been out of the workforce. Our kids were getting 12 years old, whatever. She had gotten a job, and back then it was all about healthcare, right? We before Obamacare, it's okay. She got a job, has healthcare, perfect timing. Let me set up this. Let me set up this. And so that's what I did. And the first thing I did was, guess what? I went to the hemophilia conference because I've been involved in the category. I knew there was a demand for people wanting to talk to those patients, and I'd done it before and it worked. So I
Right.
started with that. Went out to it was at Disneyland that year out in California, and our very first and I had a good omen on that because I had just started the company, but I didn't really have much yet. So you don't want to overly promote it when you don't have a lot behind it. But somebody called me up and said, we've been working on a hemophilia project for a month and we can't find anybody. Do you have any? And I said, no, but by the end of the weekend I will, because I was heading out to that conference. I came back with 136 ones, and that was our very first project. And so from there to now, we've done 12,000 projects. We've grown from a hemophilia to 1,500 different diseases. We've got 200,000 patients and caregivers, and we pay people for what they do, which is terrific. We've paid over $18 million to patients
Wow.
over time. So that's very, very helpful for them because so many of them are in constrained financial positions. And during the holidays, it helps them with gifts, all sorts of wonderful things. So who knew? Who knew it would get where it got? But that's how it started.
That's fascinating. It actually leads into kind of one of the next topics that I wanted to touch on perfectly, which is you built RPV by showing up at these patient events, fundraiser walks, advocacy conferences, and whether it was intentional or not, is a very human way to build a panel and almost a guarantee that everyone that is in the panel is going to be a real human being that you can probably verify in real time that they have said disease.
Right.
And you have a really close grip on any sort of fraud that could enter the panel. And so I'm curious to understand from you if that was deliberate or was that just convenient at the time and then it kind of transitioned into more of this deliberate strategy as you went on and saw the benefits.
Yeah, I can't say it was deliberate. I all I knew is that's the only way I knew because I knew that was the way because with a very rare population, you're not just going to find them in some random group. But I knew if I went to the events that they had, lupus walk or an MS event or the hemophilia conference, and so, but it did have that wonderful side effect, if you will. And I remember clients all of a sudden, oh wow, so you actually met these people. So it was a great way to know that they were real. And then over time we expanded to other methods, which became much more of a challenge, as you can imagine, to make sure they are who they say they are and they have what they say they have.
And was that transition motivated by just an increase in demand, and so therefore you needed to generate more supply on the panel side, so you just had to diversify your panel generation strategies?
Yeah, I mean, what happened was, so pretty over time we developed a team that would, because how many events can I go to flying around the country? So they would go to events and so again, oh great, so it's still in person, still kind of a controlled environment. And then the next step was, wait a minute, the folks that we have know other people. They're in a support group. They have a Facebook page. They can start asking people they know. And it turns out those are pretty much golden too. People are referring who you want. But from the very beginning, I said, put on the website, hey, if you have any disease, sign up. And I remember every day I had like 2 or 3 people and I'd be very excited and I'd send them a gift card. And one day I came in, there was 100. And my first thought was, oh, this is great. It's gone viral. Then I noticed of the 100 people, their diseases were in alphabetical order. That doesn't happen by chance. So it was one person in there faking all these. So it's like, that was my first taste of fraud. And oh my God, you got to be very, very careful with this. So the online, and then over time, in addition to those other methods we use, the referrals and the in person, as you can imagine, the online became bigger, and we started. And now we have a group, that puts ads out on Facebook, does all the social media. So that's, as soon as you're online, right, you can get anybody, and you've got to raise your defenses.
Right. That's so interesting. How did that little taste of fraud at the outset, when you didn't even really understand that there could be potential fraud,
Right.
when you originally saw those 100 entrants, how did that shape your strategy going forward on kind of fraud mitigation and making sure that your panel is authentic and high integrity?
Yeah, I remember the first thing I did is I found out, I don't know if it still exists under the same name, but some FBI Office of Internet Fraud. It wasn't called that. And I remember sending him stuff. Of course, I didn't hear a word. I'm wondering. I'm thinking, how can people get away with this? Like, I was so irate. What it meant was, at the very beginning, when it was still just me, it meant going through carefully one by one, reading what they said. Does the disease match up with drug that they say they're taking? I would see people putting a drug name spelled correctly, which is a giveaway. Most people couldn't spell their drug correctly. With a circle R there. Well, they're cutting and pasting it from somewhere. So it was a manual check as well as calling people up. And we would say, hey, we're not sure we're going to call you. And talking to somebody pretty quickly, I go to Dr. Smith and I do this. Pretty soon, most of the people you would call, if they looked potentially fraudulent, it went to like an unset up voicemail. So I said,
Right.
well, we can't be, if we're not sure, we're not going to let you in. So it was, well, not very efficient and certainly very time consuming. And we still do that. We still are manually, in addition to everything else, manually looking at these things because, and over time you can find red flags. I remember seeing a bunch of things that look perfectly fine, but then I would notice, hey, all of them have a color as part of their email. Like if you had to get 100 Gmails, you'd have to think of something. Joe red, Bob blue. It's like, wait a minute, that doesn't happen. That doesn't happen naturally. There was, as we grew, other people helped me with this, and thank God, because Sarah was working for us, saw a lot of names that I wouldn't have recognized. They were from Harry Potter. People are making, so that wouldn't have meant anything to me. So, so you're doing this. Are you really finding them all? You never know. The other thing that
Right.
helped us, I should say, a lot of the research that we do or our clients do with our patients is what we call qualitative. It's like this. It's like a Zoom interview. Well,
Right.
you can do an online survey and click, and who knows who you are or where you are, right? But if you're live, you've got to be pretty quick on the Google to answer questions. You know what I mean, so
Right.
that was somewhat helpful, but still, as soon as there's money involved, and here's the issue: originally we were paying people $10 gift cards to join up. Now we've changed it a little bit, but we pay people $120 per hour of their time. So that's a lot more than a lot of other research. So as soon as money is involved in the equation, there's going to be a magnet for fraud if people can do it. And it became a bigger and bigger issue as we got more and more of our folks coming to us online.
Totally. And how did that kind of uptick in fraud and maybe the sophistication of the bad actors impact your ability to run the business in kind of an efficient way? Just speak to some of the costs associated with trying to capture that fraud.
Well, we had to put people's time on it. So obviously that's a cost, because what's more expensive than an employee, a good employee, and so that was a key thing. We had to be, ideally, you want somebody to join the panel and give them an opportunity as soon as possible, because you don't want to have them join, and then they wait a month and they don't even remember why. You'll lose people, and so that's a cost, because it took time to go through. And if you're a month behind going through these, then all of a sudden you're not validating somebody for a month. Well, by then they may have forgotten who you were and they may not be as interested. So that's another cost. And then the worst cost of the world is when you miss somebody, because one, we don't want to have our clients be paying for somebody. You don't want the clients getting bad information, and the clients might say, hey, there's something weird about this person. Well, that's us, and that's our reputation, and that's our future business with them. So it's a situation. Fortunately, we focused heavily on that, and we did pay that price, but it paid off in that we got a very good reputation of not just letting anybody in, because we even had a client say to us, they had a question about somebody, but they said, oh, that's rare patient voice. We don't run them through the same process we run the other guys through. So because we had a reputation. So it paid off in that, but you're right. It's not free.
Right. There's a cost to it, and I'm sure, as you're alluding to, is it probably took you guys longer to turn around that data or those panel participants back to the client that you're serving, because you're taking that extra time, when maybe some other competitors are just flipping them quicker, but then there's a higher fraud rate within that pool.
That's right.
And you spoke about it a little bit. When let's say that someone does get through, and whether it's your team or just another market research company misses somebody, speak to the kind of cost and the process associated of reconciliation and who ends up absorbing that cost of those fraudsters getting through to the end client.
Yeah, that's a good point too. So if a client comes to us and say, hey, we have a question about person X, we check into it. So we have somebody. We used to have each of the PMs do it, and then we found it's more efficient. We have one guy that's really an expert in this, and so he takes on all of those. But it's taking his time to one, look at it. Because sometimes we back up the patients. Like the client might say, well, their answer to this open end wasn't all that great. But we look at their survey and say, well, you didn't ask for a lot of information. Or we'll
Right.
talk to the person and say, no. The reason I said it was X. So you don't want to jump the gun and assume somebody is fraud. People get very upset if they feel like they're being accused unjustly, right? So you got to be very even-handed about this thing. We would take that time, and then if there's any question at all, we wouldn't want to charge the client.
Mm.
But we might end up paying if we thought they had some arguments on their side, et cetera. We wouldn't charge the client, but we might pay the patient for their time.
Mm.
So there's a cost there of you're not making the money you should be, and you're paying money out of pocket that you're not being compensated for. So definitely costs all around. And again, the unseen most important cost is the reputation. You don't want them, every time we do a study with them, we want to keep that to an absolute minimum for our business reputation.
And as you think about kind of the future of fraud based on what you've seen in building RPD, if you view AI as an enabler for these fraudsters to be more sophisticated and generate more output than they could previously, how do you think that the market overall is going to be able to kind of absorb that level of kind of fraud uptick, but then also the increase in sophistication of the end fraudster? And kind of like speak to some of the cost dynamics and the viability at the end of the day of being able to run a profitable panel if you have kind of that more sophisticated bad actor that is also producing more output.
I mean, one of the things so many companies have to do, and knock on wood, I like to think those that work with us don't, but they look at the data and they throw a lot of it away.
Mm. Yeah.
Even some that they may be paying for. Somebody's paying for it, no matter what.
Somebody's absorbing the
Right,
cost.
and all of a sudden you thought you had 1,000 or whatever, and you really only have 700, and then you have to make that up, and your numbers are not what you expect them to be, and a time element, right? Because for them to throw that away, they have to say, well, what are we basing that on, and why are we doing it? And it doesn't happen immediately either. So there's a big cost element, no matter what you're doing there. And again, the biggest one is I like to say the old joke, what's worse than biting into an apple and seeing a worm? Seeing half a worm, right? So I mean, the worst is that you haven't seen it until somebody's made a decision based on this data. I mean,
Right.
That's a disaster. So you want to, so all along the way, it's an important problem for the whole industry, and it's certainly well recognized as a big issue. People are certain percent of fraud, and there's different levels of fraud. Is it a real person, but they're just pretending that they use a certain drug or whatever thing or are they making it up altogether and they're in a different country and it's a bot? I mean, there's different levels of what's going on.
And how do you think about, and for your process originally, before you guys opened yourself up to some of the more digital channels, obviously there was heavy emphasis on a lot of upfront effort in the initial acquisition of the panel participant. But then as you move to some of the digital panels or the digital methods to acquire those participants, what was kind of your internal method of either putting a lot of emphasis on the proactive verification of that individual and making sure that before they even enter your panel or enter anyone's data set, they are who they say they are, they're a real unique person, not a bad actor, and all of that, versus letting them in to ease kind of that friction at the beginning of the process, but then passively monitoring them and doing more of kind of like a consistent health check? Like what, in terms of just your mental framing of being in the industry for a while, how would you weigh the importance of each of like kind of the proactive measures versus some of the reactive measures, especially kind of in the world you're seeing today at market research?
Yeah, I mean, we made the decision to be more proactive. We don't want them in the panel, if at all possible. And again, we pay a price in that. At some points, we would get bogged down and be a month behind getting people in. And it's, as I say,
Right.
You really want to get them in and get them invited to something that matches as soon as you can. And so we were losing that opportunity. And while you're doing that, people that are signed up in person are real, they get caught in the long lines to get people in. So it slows everything down. Yeah, we didn't want to just let them in and see. When in doubt, we would not let them in. And again, and we pay a price there and doing a lot of work and not having as many in the panel as we could. But it was the trade-off that we felt we had to make. Certainly not everybody has made that same calculation. Otherwise, there wouldn't be so much fraud that people see. Others are, let's assume everything's fine, and it's like, well, that helped us in effect because we could differentiate ourselves, right? So
Right.
that wasn't who we were. But as I said, it wasn't free.
Right. But in the long run, you were able to confidently assert that it was a more premium group of individuals and data set. And as you said, differentiate yourself in the market. That makes a lot of sense. And I guess it kind of leads into one of the other questions I had for you, which was what type of panels and overall market research companies do you think will win in the now and then as we march further into the future, as AI gets more sophisticated? What do you think? What sort of traits will be the winning traits of this panel of the future?
Yeah, I'd like to say those who do everything right will win. I mean, it's worked for us. But I do hear people saying, well, if you're only going to pay this low price, well, it's almost like we'll pretend that you're giving us good people and you'll pretend we're paying you well. I mean, I think there's a whole ecosystem that can survive on the bad quality. And it's like nothing I wanted to be part of. But I would like to think who's going to do that in the long run, but I can't speak for everybody doing that. He made me think of another thing that was helpful to us in terms of fraud prevention, that we were in the fortunate position. In the US, we would pay people by check, an actual physical mail check, which is obsolete everywhere else in the world. And the reason that was helpful is you can get 100 Gmails like that, right?
Right.
But brick and mortar addresses, it's like we would notice if people were at the same place. Or I remember looking up addresses. You go to Google and it's a shopping mall or something. It's like, why are they giving us that address? So that was another helpful tool that we would use. Again, it's not quick and easy.
Right.
It would help us along the way and say, wait a minute, here it is. But when people would sign up and we give them a gift card, again, that was going to an email address. So
Right.
and apparently you could be anywhere in the world and get an Amazon card and convert it to crypto, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, all this becomes money and a possibility for fraud someplace.
So do you think that, like, to that point, do you think that what will win in the future is almost more of a reversion back to the more manual, higher friction efforts that can give you as the panel provider, but then also the end client at the end of the day, more confidence in the data set? Do you think that it's going to transition to back kind of more of that manual, higher friction, but then more quality?
Well, what I would hope, and I think what you would hope, is we don't have to. I mean, we want to use everything possible, but
Right.
with the tools like Verify You, all of a sudden we can take advantage. It's like AI can be a force for good or a force for evil. Let's use it for a force for good, right? Use that, and I think it can be done with much lower friction than what we did over the years. Great, you can still check certain ones, but many fewer that you would have to call, right? Many fewer that would get a red flag, because if they go through that process, it's a whole different ballgame than just some random email coming in with somebody with a Harry Potter name in their email.
Exactly right. And something that we like to talk about internally and then with some of our customers as well is the cost per response versus the cost per quality response.
Yeah.
And obviously with a solution like ours, you're increasing friction slightly at the outset, but what you do is you give the client, your end client and yourself, higher confidence that that person that went through a little bit more friction at the outset is going to be kind of a long-term asset for you all and for the end clients, and extreme confidence that they are real and unique human.
And if they're going through a little bit more friction, there's a lot less friction we're going through at that stage. As I said, manually, this, that, reading each one, calling people, et cetera, et cetera. Not that we would abandon that, but it can narrow that down to a much smaller number, which is the way to go, right? So.
Totally. And eventually maybe even pass some of those cost savings on to the end respondent, as you mentioned. It's so beneficial in their lives to get that little bit extra of spending money and do what they wish with it.
Sure.
Yeah. And I guess if we think about like a little bit more macro and like in the lead up to the Konovo acquisition, What made for you kind of what made a company like Konovo the right fit, and how do you see that getting continued to be leveraged over time?
Yeah, yeah, that's great. We were in a fortunate position that there were a lot of wonderful companies that were interested in us. So I had spent a lot of time talking with them and looking at the different situations. So we really felt Konovo was a wonderful fit because they have the same attitude as we do. It's let's not be fly by night, et cetera. Let's do everything real. Now, their specialty was mostly physicians, healthcare
Mm.
providers. And that's a bit of a different animal in that, and it's not my expertise because I'm coming from the patient side, but physicians have ME numbers. They have there's probably some natural things that help a little bit with fraud. Though I hear from time to time when somebody else says, doctor will say, "Oh, my 13-year-old kid took that survey." It's like that wasn't for them.
Mhm.
So you never want to let your guard down. But we really like the attitude they had. One for our panel, for our patients, the way they treat their respondents, and because it's if you don't have them, business is gone. So they're there, and you need their trust and their confidence and their willingness to take part. The second was treating the employees. What's good, and it looked like a really good fit, synergistic, because complementary, because they're doing physicians with patients. All of a sudden, we can offer the whole healthcare spectrum to clients. So it's a really good for everybody working because they need what we do, and we're doing it a bit differently. They're not going to a conference and for finding doctors. They go for the various partners and things like that. So different methods and different folks that we get, and it fit in really well with what they're doing. So it felt like a really good marriage, and it has been. It's been 3 months now, and it's been wonderful. They welcomed us with open arms, and we really worked well together as we sort out how to do everything together.
Yeah, that's incredible. And it kind of points to a trend overall in the market research space and specifically in the healthcare market research is that there's a bit of consolidation going on. And this being a good example of it, what are the benefits that are associated with that sort of consolidation and kind of what sort of unlocks did it have or will it have and does it currently have for a company like yours with RPV, but then also other companies that may be going through a similar process in other either in other markets, in other verticals of market research, or in other markets overall?
Yeah, well, there's certainly a lot of companies in market research and in other fields, probably in a situation like ours. You're not huge, you're profitable, but you're fairly small, and there's a lot of costs you have no matter how big you are. You have HR costs and you have payroll costs and you have to do various things, and if you can consolidate with someone that already has some of that, or all of a sudden there's a lot of cost savings for some of those table stakes that you need as anything. And the other thing is, especially when we're really small, I will wear a lot of hats. My colleague Pam would try to be HR. You're trying to do everything. Well, you're not an expert in everything, so you're able to divide up the people that know what they're doing. So you get to be a point where it's much more efficient to be a larger size company. So I'm sure a lot of people will be in that same boat, and a lot of people are in the boat in terms of personally, like I am, because I'm 68. I didn't want to run a company until I was 80. Fortunately, I'm in good health and et cetera. But I wanted to do this while I wasn't being forced to. And there's a lot of folks, a lot of aging baby boomers that have started companies, and I talk to a lot of them, and they're interested in that because they reach a point where, hey, it's time. Let me find a home for my baby. Let me find one
Right.
that works out well. So you'll do that. The other thing that certainly is driving force, and I gather from what I hear, it's really increased over the years. Is so many companies now are backed by private equity, PE firms, and so they have money out there, and they can make transactions very worthwhile for everyone involved. And so that's a factor leading to more of these things happening because the larger you are, you're not only more valuable because your revenue's higher, just by being larger you get a higher premium.
Right.
So it works out to bring companies together, especially when it's a good fit, right?
Yeah.
Like we felt we were a good fit. It's not like we're duplicating efforts in terms
Yeah.
of the type of respondents we have. So you always have to have a nice fit. But it's certainly a trend going on as you pointed out.
It's funny you mentioned that. I actually read something this morning that pointed to the fact that I think it was 10,000 Americans daily are reaching retirement age.
Yeah.
And so it kind of points to, as you said, the baby boomers are getting to a point where they're either retiring from corporate jobs or they built a company and they're ready to exit and kind of live maybe a more comfortable life or a life of less chaos as a founder.
Right. Right.
And so it actually brings up an interesting question that I think you'd have an interesting take on, which is how much of that kind of like very deep scientific knowledge that you've been able to gain over the past some odd years working in the space is then walking out of the door in a sense. And I know you're still at
Yeah.
Konovo, but if you think about like kind of your peer group and others like you who maybe at some point will be transitioning out, kind of how much that deep knowledge is then going to walk out the door, and then how will that shape those companies going forward?
Yeah. I mean, there's several things about that. One is transfer as much of that as you can to everybody else. And that's because I used to think that, oh, wait a minute, who's going to do this if I don't do it? But no, over time, other people learn and they get even better at it. So I feel like I've transformed a lot of that knowledge transferred it, I guess, into other folks. So that's a key part of it. It's not like it's being wasted. Well, I find folks that have been with companies too that they'll give them a package and they'll be out the door, and then all of a sudden they realize they don't have the expertise and they have to bring them back as a consultant. So sometimes people get a little carried away, or they think anybody can do anything. It's like there is quite a value to the experience, but yeah, you want to do whatever you can so that knowledge level is not lost, so that it is passed on to folks that are doing it, or will be
Yeah.
doing it into the future.
I guess as a closing question here, I want you to speak a little bit more macro about your journey as a founder, and not specific to market research. You can tie in market research for sure, but more just about your journey of building from 0 to 1, going to these conferences and
Yeah.
recruiting people yourself, and then also running everything else that the business needed to function by yourself, and then eventually building a team and getting to where you got.
Yeah, and I'm sure a lot of people have similar stories. If I had known everything that it would take, would I have done it? Because so many things happen, and then there was a solution somewhere. But if I knew all the challenges, I might have said. I remember at the very beginning, I'm like, okay, they really need these patient panels. Nobody's providing this need. This is great. And then as soon as I started, I looked at a company and I read on its website that they had patients. I'm like, oh my God, they're not going to need us. But then I talked to the guy there and he said, we really don't have them. We'll come to you for them. I said, oh, good. That's what I want to hear. But yeah, it's funny. So you start, and I didn't know at the beginning whether it would just be me and I just work on a few hemophilia projects and maybe I could make a living at it. And then as it started to grow, I came up with a rule of thumb for me. If I'm working till midnight, it's time to hire somebody else. So after a year, it's like hire. And I brought my first guy on and he's still with us and he runs all of operations. And then 6 months later, it's like, we need somebody else. And it kind of grew and grew and grew that way as we were doing it. And then I remember I was still working on projects at the beginning. And after we had like 4 or so guys, they basically said, well, stop doing that. In other words, they knew I should spend my time on the proposals or whatever I was doing, but they were doing it better than I was at the point. And now we have people, they work have like 20 projects going at once. I learned once you get past like 3 or 4, you have to have a good system because you can't keep it in your head. There's too many things going on. So thank God people were able to come in that were better at this and grew better at it. And then you add systems along the way. Let's get better. Let's pull in this thing. Let's get this. We didn't build things ourselves. We would use Dropbox and various tools available. But you have these things, and we have a wonderful partner that built our database and has a whole system that we use. But if you don't use it, you don't know how. And so I used to be, I could go out, a client would come in on the weekend and let me help him. I'm like, I can't help you. I don't know how to do it anymore. But that's a good thing. You don't, I mean, and anybody who goes through the process, you learn. Companies don't want you to be the center of all the activity, because then if they buy your company, what are they going to do if you're not there? So you really want to show them. And to me, we had gotten to that point. That's another reason why I felt it was time. Is the company was running without me. Yeah, I was involved. I was helping make decisions. Things would bubble up to me, but the sales were coming in and our team was building the sales. The team that was running all the projects was doing all that. We had a team that was building all the panel. I was still putting the checks into QuickBooks, but that's anybody could have done that. So it was at the point where, hey, people didn't want to believe it at first, but they see it's like, no, You don't need me. I'm not what makes this thing work. I build it, but now these others are doing it, and you'll be just fine. You'll just fine without me. I've kind of done what I can. You can probably take it further. So you run into all that. It's quite an interesting process. But I got to that point, and fortunately, I got to it in an organized approach and didn't just jump at anything. I would get from the very first year, people would approach me about buying it. I'm like, this is my little baby. What? So I would write their names down. I said, I'll take that down. But to me, it made no sense. Let me build it. Let me build it. Let me build it. And then it got to the point where I said, hey, I can see what we need to do. And I started working with a wonderful firm that helped us, an investment bank firm that helps us take us to market. A couple of years before it really happened. It was a year of getting ready, and then it was a year of doing this and that. And I'm sure people might not have that luxury, but it was a wonderful thing. We weren't rushing into anything. We really got ready for it. We knew what companies would want. We had our data ready, our things. We positioned ourselves very well, could demonstrate the value that we might have with different types of organizations. So that was interesting. And I'm happy to share my experience with anybody that's going through the same thing. It's the one thing I'd never done before, and I'll never do it again, but I'm happy to share what I learned in the process and try to make it easier for anybody else that's going to do the same thing.
Share some of the pain so they don't have to go through much.
Learning.
Yeah. I love that. Well, as we close up here, is there anything that we didn't cover that you want people to know, or even specific stakeholders in the market research space that you look back on your career and say, I wish I knew that when I was kind of at their age or in their position?
Yeah, I mean, several things. I would encourage people to not be afraid of starting their own business. I mean, when I first was, I would never even have thought of that. I didn't feel like I knew anything. But then I had this idea, and then I didn't know how to do any of the specific. I didn't even know how to invite people to a survey. But that didn't concern me because I knew it could be done. So somebody can tell me how. So don't feel you have to know everything. There's so many people that can help you do these things. And if you have an idea, because if I had to do it again, maybe I would have tried to do it 10 years before. Maybe it wouldn't have worked as well. Maybe the timing helped me out. But I encourage people to do that. They talk about most new businesses failing. I didn't even think about that. You just think, well, mine won't because I'll do this, that, and the other. And if you have a problem, you'll learn from it. And so many people that are been successful after something failed, right? So that's what I would say. Don't be afraid to do that because the rewards are wonderful. It's so good. The companies I work for were great, and I love people, and I learned a lot. But there's something about working for yourself and your clients, and every day you're like, oh, we'll do this and that. You make decisions. You don't have to wait a long time, and you can do. The rule of thumb I used also was everything I didn't like where I worked before, we wouldn't do. And so you say, okay, we're not going to do that. I know everybody hates it, so we're not going to do that. We're not going to make you do that. We're going to do this or that and the other. And then we started giving people all half days and Friday before vacation, and half days Fridays in the summer, and they still got all their work done, et cetera, et cetera. And I know that doesn't work for every company, and you have to be client oriented, but there's certain things we were able to do, and it was like, hey, we can do this, and it works. So I give everybody that. The other thing, let me throw a sales pitch out there though.
Yeah.
If anybody out there has family members or friends with any disease, rare or non-rare, if they think they might be interested in sharing their stories confidentially, et cetera, happy to have them sign up, rarepatientvoice.com, and all the questions and answers about things are there, but it's confidential. We pay people, and people really feel fulfilled by being able to help those coming after them with the same condition.
That's awesome. And in terms of reaching you personally, Wes, for anyone who just wants to connect with the company or just wants to talk to you as a fellow builder and understand kind of your words of wisdom, is there anywhere they can reach you, or just reach out to the company?
Probably the best is LinkedIn, because I do a lot. LinkedIn was a very wonderful tool for us to build our business. I used to do like newsletters, and then I found out so many people kept changing jobs and the emails wouldn't go through. And you wouldn't know that because they didn't like decommission the email. Anyway, but not everybody sees what you post on LinkedIn. But over time, they see a large percentage, and it follows them around. So we would go to conferences. Oh, I saw this, or I see you guys are everywhere. It helped us because we needed to be top of mind. You need patients, call us. It worked well for our business. So, but LinkedIn, you'll find me. I don't think there's a lot of other Wes Michaels, or you'll see it. see me in there, and I'm on there enough so that if I get a message or something, I'm happy to respond. So that's I love it. Happy to help people.
Well, Wes, this has been incredible and hugely valuable to the audience and us. And I'm really glad that we took this time to go back and forth about this space and really just learn from your insights in building this space for so long. Well, to our audience, thanks for listening. This is the Human Hour, and we'll see you next time. And thanks again to Wes.
Thanks a lot, David, and thanks everybody.